Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, joining forces, China teams up with Southeast Asian countries in a joint Navy drill to deepen ties and boost the security in the region as defense ministers of ASEAN and its partner countries hold talks in Brunei. And the booming industry, or so it seems. Theme park investment in China has soared. Shanghai's new Disneyland set to attract tens of millions a year. But does every theme park in China share the same fairy tale ending? We begin today's show with a joint military drill alongside the ASEAN defense ministers meeting, which kicked off a week ago and is scheduled to end this Thursday. It involves all 10 ASEAN countries and 8 partner countries, which include China and the United States. In recent years, the South China Sea has turned into a hotspot for potential regional conflicts. Some say the drill this time is a sign of easing tensions, but will it really work? Before our discussion, first let's take a look at this.
Vessels, helicopters, maritime patrol aircraft. These are troops from 18 countries joining forces in this multinational drill. Participating vessels set sail from Brunei, conducting drills all the way to Singapore. In Brunei, teams rolled out sea rescue operations, and in Singapore, they tested their assault capabilities. The exercise is designed to enhance practical military cooperation and strengthen coordination.
I think we all recognize that these are transboundary, these are areas of challenges that no one country can tackle by itself. So the ADMM plus MSCT exercise does provide a very important platform for us to work together and also to demonstrate our commitment to manage and to handle these challenges collectively.
The Chinese military sent its Lanzhou guided missile destroyer, a modern new type missile ship with stronger air defense and anti-submarine combating capabilities. All staff on board the destroyer communicated in English throughout the whole process for the first time.
Brunei and Singapore started a new monitoring controlling system called Opera this time, where all the ships will coordinate and cooperate, which is also the first time.
With tensions in the South China Sea still escalating, the drill is seen as parties trying to prevent crisis and reduce tension together.
We will work with ASEAN nations to preserve peace and freedom of navigation in the South China Sea.
However, differences are likely to remain in the foreseeable future. A U.S. Navy warship sailed close to a Chinese-claimed reef in the South China Sea on Tuesday. Meanwhile, an international arbitration launched unilaterally by the Philippines against China's territorial sovereignty in South China Sea is expected within weeks, which China has repeatedly refused to accept or participate in. With new leaders set to take office in both the US and the Philippines, questions over the South China Sea issue continue to hang mid-air.
There we go. For more on this joint drill, we are now joined in our Beijing studio by Mr. Zhu Chenghu, a Chinese military expert. Welcome to our program. And also, Mr. Zhu is a retired general from the Defense Affairs Institute at National Defense University here in China. Meanwhile, joining us from Singapore, we're having Mr. Lim Tai Wei, a adjunct research fellow from the East Asian Institute at the National University of Singapore. Welcome back, sir. And also from Washington, D.C. in the United States, we're having Mr. Michael Hannan, who is a senior fellow with the Center for 21st Century and Intelligence. He's also director of research for the Foreign Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. Gentlemen, welcome to the three of you. First of all, how much, Mr. Lim, since this is an ASEAN Navy exercise with other partner countries, you're coming from Singapore, how much do you think this kind of joint Navy drills will be able to help all sides to clear up some of the technical details, at least to avoid technical conflicts or conflicts as a result of technical confusions?
First of all, the main characteristic of this exercise is that it's multilateral. And as your program has mentioned, it involves the 10 ASEAN countries and 8 partner nations. And so this multilateral exercise generally promotes functionalism, cooperation, better understanding, and CBMs, confidence building amongst the armed forces of the different countries. And within these different countries, there is, of course, a diversity of cultures, training tactics, as well as languages. And this exercise helps to decrease potential for misunderstanding and increase understanding and confidence between different armed forces. And there are common issues, what is normally known as a no detriments issue, issues like counter-terrorism, counter-piracy, which are commonalities and common challenges amongst the countries that are involved. So you can see the diversity and pluralistic rallying of nations around these common issues.
Mr. O'Hanlon, confidence building measures, those are beautiful words. Will those beautiful words really translate into actions and results?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think they are important for making sure that the navies themselves don't accidentally or inadvertently come into a conflict in a way that was not desired. But there is a broader political struggle here that the confidence building measures will not and cannot solve, because we all know that there are big shifts happening in the South China Sea. China is trying to exercise or back up in a new way claims that it's had for a long time. Other countries in the region also have claims, but they don't have the power of China. The United States has power, but it doesn't have any claims, but it does have certain alliances. And everyone needs the South China Sea for transportation. So we have a number of conflicting concerns. I tend to think it's going to be possible to find a compromise. I'm optimistic, but I think we are a long ways from that compromise right now, and therefore the struggle will continue. I just hope it remains nonviolent along the way.
All right. Mr. O'Hanlon, if I could, just a technical detail, because besides the 10 ASEAN countries, 8 partner countries, including the United States, also send in its own Navy. At what level is the Navy officers being sent in, and also how technically involved are they in terms of the U.S. involvement with ASEAN countries, including its involvement with China at this moment?
Well, I see the United States presence as sort of natural. It's the sort of thing we would want to do. By itself, it's really no big deal because we've been there anyway on our own, and we are, as you know, not recognizing China's territorial claims. We are not feeling that we must stay away from any of the Chinese claims or the new Chinese man-made islands. And so now we are involved in a multilateral exercise too. That's just part and parcel of the same ongoing activity. I think it's good that both major powers, the United States and China, that both of us interact with other countries, because it creates the need for each of us to legitimate and explain our actions and our presence in ways that comply with international standards. So I tend to welcome it from both Beijing and Washington.
All right. General Zhu here in Beijing, may I ask you also the same question? At what level is China participating in this kinds of a joint Navy exercise with ASEAN countries and also some of the other partner countries, including the United States, given the fact that we have already heard earlier on Tuesday a U.S. ship was trying to get into the sea territory in which China claims as its own reef, or near the China claimed reef. So will those in the exercise really be those that is going to deal with the situation? That is very important, because no matter how many exercises you're having, if those are not the one that's going to deal with the situation later, it's still not going to work. So, General Zhu, may I ask you about that question, technical question?
I think the exercises among the 18 nations are very important. It is because this sort of exercise are conducive to increasing the confidence building measures, as well as to increase the trust among them. Of course, I don't think this exercise will address the issue like the disputes over territory and the disputes over the maritime interest. Here, I believe that the key actors are a key actor is the United States. So on the one hand, it is asking the others not to do this and not to do that. But on the other hand, it is taking a lot of provocative actions against other countries, especially against China. So this sort of actions and words are not conducive at all to the stability of Southeast Asia.
All right, besides that technical question I want to ask you, what about one step further? What do you think can be achieved when we talk about all of these technical details that are important to avoid conflict, at least that could be avoidable? Then what kinds of details are we talking about from the Chinese Navy side? And also, what about the readiness of others to also deal with these kinds of the technical details? Will a few days of joint Navy drill be able to solve how much % of the real problem?
No, I don't think this sort of exercise will solve the real problems there in South China Sea, but it is conducive to the promotion of the mutual understanding, and it's very good to the promotion of the friendly ties between the soldiers. I think this sort of friendship is very important. When they meet with each other on the sea, I think if they're old friends, I think they can settle some of the issues which might be useful to prevent the conflict or accidental incident. I think this sort of exchanges, this sort of exercises are very important. Of course, if they can sit together and talk more and exchange more, that will be much better.
All right, but at this moment we've seen a lot of different situations going on all at the same time, particularly political situations. The decision, for example, of the arbitration case against unilaterally initiated by the Philippines, as the Chinese see it, will probably be announced in May or June. Last week, Chinese Foreign Ministry again stressed, and here we quote, by not accepting or participating in the arbitration unilaterally initiated by the Philippines, China is upholding this sanctity of international law, including that of the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. End of quote. That, of course, is coming from officials coming from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Having said that, though, Mr. Lin, that puts this specific joint exercise in a very tricky time, I would say. And also tricky for the ASEAN countries to be able to achieve the assumed goal of this joint exercise, isn't it?
Well, the exercise primary objective is on counterterrorism and also anti-piracy issues. And it is a useful exercise because sometimes to be able to counter terrorism, you have to practice maneuvers against the hijacking of the ship. And as the other two guests have mentioned, it is not intended to solve all problems at the same time. And these problems regarding maritime issues will require time. Time is of the essence, but along the way, for greater understanding, there's a need for greater rapport between the armed forces, and there's a need to understand each other culturally and also in terms of tactics. And this exercise helps to contribute towards those confidence-building measures. But with the larger issues at hand, it requires time. And as your program has mentioned, the entire situation is very dynamic. Yesterday, we just witnessed the incoming election of an presidential candidate in the Philippines. Philippines is a traditional ally and friend of the U.S. At the same time, the winning candidate has also mentioned that he's willing to talk to and have dialogue with China. So I think time is needed to see what will transpire and unfurl from the recent events, the dynamic events that has been happening in this region, not just about this exercise, but also about recent regional elections.
Right. Mr. O'Hanlon, we've already discussed about the Filipino elections yesterday, so I wouldn't want to go into the details about that. Having said that, though, these kinds of Navy joint exercise, one of its goals is to cooperate and feel about one another and have a feeling about one another. But on the other hand, it is also the time that people are thinking, how can those emergency mechanisms be also tested out, be also worked out, during these kind of exercises so that these exercises could be serving its purposes eventually. How much do you think, from your perspective, I know you're an expert in defense, will those goals be achieved? We've already seen some emergency mechanism being established between China and the United States, for example, the telephone call, as they say, the specific security line important for U.S.-China communication among the military. But will they also be put into use? How often are they being put into use? Will these kinds of joint military exercises really help us to also get to that front, which of course should be about anti-terrorism, but at the same time, all the other elements could also be activated at the same time?
Right. Well, I would say there are three types of situations.
Go ahead.
And the answer to your question will depend on which type of situation we're talking about. So if American and Chinese Navy ships happen to be, for a sort of a random reason, close to each other, the hotlines do help because they reduce the odds of an inadvertent or accidental approach. So for that category, it's a good thing. Also, it's a good thing, as my friend Mr. Lin just mentioned, if we're trying to cooperate on counter-piracy or on counterterrorism, where we have very clear common interests, and we might have to actually do something together. Let's say there is one American ship and one Chinese ship and one group of pirates, and the pirates are trying to hide inside of some island, safe areas, or run away from one of the ships. Maybe the other country can help. So close communication there could be an asset that benefits both of us. So for that second category, this is also good. But for the third category, it may not help. For example, let's say on the issue of the Scarborough Shoal, we know that the American ally, the Philippines, and China have different interpretations of who should own that shoal. And as you pointed out a few minutes ago, there could be an important arbitration ruling on that issue in the next few weeks. In that situation, historically, this is the kind of case where navies sometimes try to assert their own country's prerogatives or back up their own country's claims. And in that kind of a situation, you could imagine Chinese and American ships coming close together, and they are not really trying to deconflict their operations. They are both trying to stand up for their own interests. And in that situation, we have to be careful not to expect the hotline to solve the political problem. The problem requires a higher level of discourse. It cannot be solved by a technical fix.
But at the same time, General Zhu, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not involved in the military, but many of you have been having a history. That is, there can be certain technical bottom lines.
Sorry?
Technical bottom lines when it comes to militaries or navies of all sides, when even the last situation, as being mentioned by Mr. O'Hannon, talking about all sides using the military to demonstrate their political position, that still the militaries could exercise certain technical capability to make sure that things will not get into conflict, while at the same time they can also demonstrate the political position of their relevant government. This is the exact capability we are talking about here, the capability of avoiding unnecessary crises.
Yeah, it's very important. I think if a conflict happens here, I don't think it's in the interest of any country. So I think that all countries, all parties concerned should try their efforts to avoid the conflict in South China Sea, including Huanyang Island, which is actually, there is no dispute at all. If you look at the treaties like Paris Treaty or Washington Treaty, which is very clear, concluded by the United States and was Spain and was the British, was Britain. So the boundary line is very clear. So on this sort of political issues, territorial issues, this is the sovereignty issue. So if the arbitration is done on that, I don't think any country which, for example, like China, the fishermen have been fishing there for more than 2,000 years. They will accept this sort of arbitration. So this is very difficult. Therefore, I believe that including international court and international actors like major powers, China and the United States, will have to restrain themselves And we'll have to try to talk without any other means can solve this issue.
All right.
Talk is the only way.
It's the only way. We hope that is the case, and we hope those talks can be conducted in an efficient way. Before we go, we only got 1.5 minutes left, so maybe 20 seconds from every one of you. We are looking at very different political phase these days all over the world. In the U.S., you got an election season, very unique candidates emerging, a major candidate for the presidential election. Inside the Philippines, the new president emerges, also being called their country's Donald Trump. And also inside Singapore, it's the second generation of leadership already. In China as well, it's a new generation of leaders. So when it comes to avoiding conflicts, while at the same time standing firm on the national interests, how are the militaries going to help in that regard to the political leaders? Mr. O'Hanlon.
Well, I don't think militaries can be expected to do it all. I think the militaries are professional. Even Admiral Harris, who I realize is not all that popular in certain parts of China, even he has recently said the Chinese military is very professional. He respects the Chinese military. The problem, if we're going to have one, cannot be solved entirely by the militaries. The political leaderships are going to have to look for some kind of compromise on how we think about the future of the South China Sea.
All right, and Mr. Lim, 20 seconds if you can.
It requires transparent, consultative dialogues between political leaders. It requires time and patience to work out the compromise. And perhaps we will need a lot more time for all these problems to be resolved.
All right, General Zhu, last words?
I think the militaries will have to build up some trust at least. And the trust will be conducive to reduce the miscalculation. And the miscalculation may avoid action and reaction or arms race or counter or destructive actions in this region.
It's great to find three cool-minded gentlemen in this discussion. At least we hope some of your wishes will come true. Thank you so much. And it's very important that they will come true. General Zhu Chenghu here in Beijing, Mr. Lim Tai-wei in Singapore, and Mr. Michael O'Hanlon in Washington, D.C. Really appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you for being with us. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. Jumping on the bandwagon, a 6-week trial run of Shanghai's new Disneyland kicked off with thousands waiting at its gate. And the theme park is set to attract tens of millions a year. We take a deeper look at the booming theme park industry in this country. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV. Shanghai's new Disneyland kicked off its trial operations over the weekend ahead of the official grand opening on June the 16th. Cast members and their relatives were invited to a sneak peek of the mega theme park. The long-awaited Disney debut is a big thing for tourism in Shanghai, as they say. The park is expected to attract some 25 million people every year, eager to meet Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and all. Let's take a look.
A long wait in line. The park, not officially open yet, is revealing itself for the first time to some special guests, contributors to the resort and their families.
Today we're just like ordinary tourists, really looking forward to it.
Upon entry, visitors find themselves face to face with the largest ever castle constructed in a Disney park. Then come the bands, fun rides, and of course the famous parade, complete with decorated floats and world-famous Disney cartoon characters. Attached to the theme park is the Disneytown retail and entertainment area, also in business. Nearly half of the shops, including Asia's first World of Disney store, were opened to the public.
I came here to queue up at about 7 o'clock in the morning. I've bought some products that are unique to Shanghai Disney, the big Shanghai series, and I have my tickets booked. I certainly want to find out what's inside.
The resort is a $5.5 billion joint venture between Disney and the Shanghai Shendi Group. This project counts as one of the largest foreign investments in China. When it is in full operation, Shanghai Disney Resort will expect 25 million visits annually, which means 70,000 visits every day. That would generate 50 billion yuan in spending annually. Tickets for Shanghai Disney are already available online. But if you're thinking about attending its June 16th grand opening, it will be worth making other plans. Tickets were sold out a while back.
And for more on Disneyland in China, we are joined here in the Beijing studio, Mr. Dong Jun, co-founder of the Ever Beijing Limited, that's an art consulting group here in China. Welcome, sir. Also in Beijing, we're having Mr. Rick Denham, co-director of the Global Business Journalism Program at Tsinghua University, originally coming from the United States. And also joining us from Tokyo, Mr. William Saito, a special advisor to the Japanese cabinet and also founder of Intercur. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. We've got a very strong panel for a theme park, I guess. But 5.5 billion US dollars, that's the cost to build this theme park, which has been long anticipated and expected here in China. Will it really be able to earn the money?
Well, we just heard in your report that annually it could income, not necessarily profit, just the first year. If that really happens, that would make about 8 billion US dollars in just 1 year. That's already bigger than the total investment, if we believe it.
If we believe it. When was the last time for you, Rick? Let me ask you an easier question. To the Disneyland or Disney World?
Well, for me it was 40 years ago, 1976, when I was a college student in Disneyland, and I remember the experience. It was the mouse experience that you would have, but what I also remember for a poor college student is that it was very expensive.
Yeah.
That they pushed the bounds of how much a family would be willing to pay for this experience, and they're still doing it.
That was $20 at your time.
Right, exactly.
And now it's about $60 to $70 here
in
China.
Shanghai.
In Shanghai.
Yeah, 500 RMB.
Right.
For an adult.
Exactly. And that's not during the rush hour or the rush time, as they say, the holiday season. It could be even higher. But what about you, Mr. Saito? The Japanese seem to like a Disney park, anything American theme parks, it seems. What about your experience?
Well, I mean, I think that they take the good parts of the American model there, but I think if you look at all the Disneylands around the world, there are slight tweaks that are cultural adaptations there. But back to the pricing thing, I think that the high price is actually, at least in Japan, a lure itself, that you're going to somewhere special, you're paying this kind of money. And so that, ironically, I think, leads to part of its mystique and praise from the people who come.
Yes, indeed. Talking about trying to bring in local culture, the Disneyland here in China did try its best, even when it comes to food, which of course the Chinese care the most. They'd even have the, all the Chinese food being made into the shape of the Mickey Mouse or the many of the other characters of their cartoons. Having said that, though, what do you make of this Chinese culture meeting Western culture, and that's very popular culture, shall I say, to say the least, when it comes to Disneyland and Disney World. As Rick just mentioned, as a very young man, he went there, but not anymore.
I think there should be a debate even inside Walt Disney Company, what Western or American should really authentically copy into China, and what local culture can be adapted into this Disney resort. But we still have time to check out what's actually inside it when it opens officially on the 16th of June. But when I checked out their official website, I couldn't find Mulan, because as a Chinese, I would be looking for something like Mulan that Chinese can associate among very limited number of Disney figures, but I couldn't find it.
Does it matter when it comes to business?
Well, actually, yeah, because for a time when Mulan was very popular, and Chinese felt very proud that part of their culture can be written and displayed in American performing art.
What about from a journalistic perspective, Rick? I mean, you have been a very seasoned journalist covering U.S. elections and many other things, and now journalism in business about business. What do you make of this? Does it make sense, first of all, that the Chinese are so much interested in theme park coming from the U.S.?
To me, I mean, as someone who covers American politics, I find Disney fascinating because Disney is, in some ways, quintessential America to the world. And Disney has not always traveled well. Euro Disney has had a number of problems over the years, and particularly at the beginning. And I think Disney learned a lot from that. I mean, Disney in Japan is far more successful. Disney in Hong Kong is more successful. And I saw a film and watched a speech by Bob Iger, the CEO of Walt Disney in Shanghai last fall, and they really have tried to figure out how they can reach out to Chinese people, everything from architecture to the food, without compromising what makes Disney Disney, which is the mouse, which is the Magic Kingdom, the architecture that they have of some of their buildings.
Mr. Saito, both Japan and China have a very long history. Enough fascinating stuff in our own histories that one might wonder how sustainable will Disney's theme park or others' theme park coming into these countries and be able to function in the near future and particularly in the long future.
I think there's a fundamental difference between Disneyland and many of the other competitors. If you look at it, it's a complete platform. And platforms, whether it's selling an iPhone or whether it's a ticket to Disneyland, it really feeds upon itself, that the movies and the TV productions that they do get branded into products that then get sold at the Disneyland. And so it's this virtuous cycle that I think Disney does very, very well. And then they make these little adaptments to various countries. I found out a small bit of trivia that the castle in the original Disneyland is based on Sleeping Beauty, but in Japan they thought that it would not go well, so they used Cinderella instead. I'd be curious to see who the main character for the castle in Shanghai is, but I think it's Disney's maintaining the Disney-like properties, but also allowing the flexibility of the local partners to adjust for these things. And then, that we have this global phenomenon and platform that feeds upon itself is I think, quite impressive and somewhat unique.
All right, I'll bear that in mind. The castle is the message. I'll go ahead and take a look. Talking about theme parks, of course, it's not just Disneyland in China. Theme parks in China have been emerging in this country back in the year 1980s, and industrial research shows that the number of theme parks in China grew to over 30 at the end of the 1980s. That was very early years, as you may know. It was the time when China just opened up to the outside world. 1990s saw a huge leap in figure. By 2013, already 2,500 parks were open to tourists. And of course, more have been built in the past few years as well. Mr. Dong, here comes the question. A lot of competition. And will the local ones be able to compete with Disneyland? And will Disney have more franchise in China or different kinds of cooperation? What do you think? Can those business models be possible in China?
Well, at least I think the Chinese, you may call them copycats, but those local competitors or developers, they have some models available for them to learn from, but at the same time, they also need to come up with something different. And that's the even bigger challenge. Of course, the advantages they enjoy, that the local would always try to do something favorable to local competitors to cultivate and nurture them. But at the same time, what they lack significantly and cannot, make up within a short period of time is they don't have the, the culture behind the theme parks. And you don't have, related film industry, film business associated with the park itself. And also, Chinese developers would copy from appearance and the most obvious ones very quickly, but without leaving enough budget to do, future or softer things to further improve. And then it loses steam very quickly and loses innovative power to catch up.
Yes,
and
indeed.
That will be bigger challenge, midway or in the latter face.
We talk about theme park in China. Although theme parks are growing in China, as we mentioned earlier, not all of them perform very well. We also got for you looking at this research, over 300 theme parks with an initial investment of over $7.5 million US in China, but over 70%, 70 of them are seeing negative growth of profit all over this country. Will Disneyland be able to provide an interesting case study for all the other Chinese collaborators or competitors in the future?
Well, I think that Disneyland is unique, but it also reflects some of the big issues with theme parks. They're very expensive to launch, they're very expensive to keep going, and you need a constant flow of people. To me, the word that's most important is unique. There has to be something special that gets a large number of people there, because you have to have a huge crowd to keep paying the upkeep and to keep staying up with the times, modernization. Disney can do it, but there are a lot of the copycats will have problems. If people don't have a good experience, there's not going to be good word of mouth. And Disney gets a lot of free advertising. I mean, the products and the movies
like
all
what we are
play
doing
off.
right now.
And if you're an independent theme park where you're trying to launch it, or if you're a real estate venture and you want a theme park to draw people to your new development, it's a lot harder. And so I think Disney has a better chance of surviving because of all the advantages of Walt Disney Company.
But Rick, may I just follow up by asking you, I mean, American culture, at the very beginning of China's opening up stage, it was very fascinating to many of the common Chinese. But as more Chinese travel abroad to different kinds of countries, including also studying in the United States and many other things, also to other countries as well, is American culture, particularly as pop culture, as Disneyland, as ancient as Disneyland theme parks, are they still going to be attractive, culturally speaking, at all in the near future even?
Well, the short answer is it's not as unique, because a lot of Chinese people have visited Disneyland in the United States. But think of the size of China. Despite the huge number of tourists who have left China, there's still many, many more Chinese tourists who don't travel to the United States. And Disneyland in Shanghai will be their closest that they will get to America. So yeah, it's not the highest of American culture. It is pop culture, but it is the kind of thing that is accessible to the world.
Mr. Saito, what do you make of it? I mean, are the Japanese still interested in theme parks, especially American theme parks? What would the Japanese experience be able to tell us about China, possibly?
You know, I think it's very much understood and accepted, and obviously growing even in Japan at this moment. I think the distinction that you have to make with the Disneyland business model is that it's not a real estate play versus it's really an entertainment organization. That the business model is fascinating if you think about it. Going back to the content that I just described, Star Wars is now a Disney property. How that gets put into a movie, then into merchandising, and then a ride that gets refreshed every few years in a Disneyland resort. Like the prior guest mentioned, the uniqueness is maintained in a Disneyland type model because it has these other facets to build upon. So I think, yeah, for other theme parks to compete, it's very difficult to do so because you don't have that content creation that Disneyland is doing so well. With that, I think places like Tokyo are feeding off that, and I think have a successful model that is still growing.
Here in China, Mr. Dong, we've seen intentions to culture, or rather to nurture China's cultural industry. For example, the upcoming Shenzhen Cultural Fair is a big annual event in China to begin with. But the question is, what makes culture possible? Whether we're talking about popular culture or elite culture, whatever. Is it government efforts? Is it imports of cultures? Or is it a long process of having the grow on their own and eventually crystallizing in some of the possible fruits? So help us to understand, what does it take?
I think in China's own situation, you can't do something big without the the blessing and endorsement by the government. The government strategy is extremely important because businesses of all sectors have been used to, reading and interpreting what's on the top leadership's mind. But at the same time, of course, for China, for such a big country with rich culture, to really embrace a cultural development strategy, it's really up to society and the entire nation to do something. I think the key challenge now for my colleagues and my business in our business is that we need to start respecting people's work. I mean, work done by human beings, instead of only paying attention or investing in natural resources, blessed by the nature. So I think then transparency and a relatively honest business culture gradually built.
Of course. When you're talking about all of this, the other two guests were listening very attentively. Thank you so much for the three of you, gentlemen, for joining us on this round of discussion about Disneyland. Dong Jun, Rick Dunham, and William Seidel. Really appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you for being with us. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.